The first siren hit like a hammer at 2:11 a.m. Red lights flashed across the control room. On the monitor for Pod D, Cell 23, a shape moved where no shape should be. The door icon showed locked. The tier was quiet. The speaker popped with static. Then, in the black and white frame, a shadow slid past the tiny food port, slow, like someone breathing against the metal. Officer Mark Hale froze with his coffee halfway to his lips. Officer Carla Reyes, who knew every hum this building could make, leaned closer to the screen and said one word that made everyone's stomach drop. Count. The night shift at a California Supermax is all alarms and waiting. You count, you check, you count again. At 2:12 a.m., Mark spoke into the radio. Control to Pod D. Confirm status of 23. No answer. The second camera, the wide one at the end of the tier, blinked as if an eyelid fell and lifted. In that blink, the shadow was suddenly further down the line. That made no sense. Doors were locked. Floors were clean. Nothing loose. Still, the motion box on the screen drew a bright square around empty air. The siren kept wailing. Somewhere below them, a steel door thudded as a response team jogged into place. Carla held her breath. Look at the glass, she said. On the monitor, the thick window in cell 23 was fogged from inside, as if someone had been standing there a long time, breathing slow and steady. But their last round showed the cell asleep, the inmate on his bunk, sheet pulled to his shoulder, both hands visible. Mark rolled the last log back with his finger. 206 normal, he read, even though they both knew normal doesn't mean safe. At 2:13, the tier lights flicked once, like a wink. The shadow stopped right under the camera and seemed to look up at them. The hair rose on Mark's neck. Units in position? He asked. The radio clicked twice. Ready. Carla reached for the intercom button. Pod D, stand by for voice ID. She pressed and held. Cell 23, state your name. The speakers carried her calm voice down the concrete throat of the block. Silence answered. The red lights washed the control room. Mark swallowed. He could feel the whole place, the walls, the doors, the cameras, holding its breath. Then a sound came back through the intercom that didn't belong to one person. It was a scrape, then a whisper that seemed to be two voices, one riding under the other like a second track on a tape. We see you. The team on the tier stopped moving. Carla's thumb lifted off the talk button. Mark's coffee hit the counter and toppled. The shadow slid again, past a door that hadn't opened in years. On the monitor, a tiny green square lit up for a heartbeat where it shouldn't, like a lock had thought about unlocking, then changed its mind. Mark looked at the board, then the live feed, then the board again. Numbers didn't match what his eyes were seeing. He said the thing no night shift officer likes to say, "This is not a camera glitch." The siren cut off. The silence afterward felt louder. Then, from deep in the pod, something metallic banged 3 times, measured, patient like knuckles on a door. The intercom carried it to them, each knock bigger than it should be. Carla leaned into the mic again, calm as a surgeon. Pod D, hold position. Control will investigate. She and Mark traded a look that said they knew what the rules were and also knew they might have to bend them. She reached for the master panel. That's when the screen for cell 23 changed. The bunk was empty. And that was the last clear thing before everything got worse. Hours earlier, when the night began, the building felt like a machine that had already decided to work. You could hear it in the steady fan noise. You could see it in the way the cameras made silver squares on the monitors. The security housing unit, people call it the SG, was built for control. Thick doors, tight windows, lights that run on schedule. On nights like this, there were only a handful of officers for a whole cluster of pods because most of the people in the cells were locked down 23 hours a day. The job sounds simple to people outside. It is not. It means being alert when everything looks calm. It means seeing small changes, a towel moved, a pencil stub missing, a face that looks too still, and knowing what they might mean. Mark had 8 years on nights. He learned to listen to floors because floors tell you if someone is pacing or if a screw is loose in a hinge. He learned to smell bleach from 2 tiers away and to tell real sleep from fake. If you asked him what the hardest part was, he would not talk about fights. He would talk about the quiet. Quiet can hide a lot. When a tear goes still, your mind wants to fill it with stories. That is, when mistakes happen. Good night shift officers learn to let quiet be quiet and still be ready. Carla was the best in the building at hearing small sounds. She could tell a ventilation rattle from a whisper. She could hear the difference between a spoon and a paper clip hitting concrete. People said that when Carla took count, the tear itself seemed to behave. She would say that was nonsense. She would say these are people, not ghosts. But even she admitted nights like this felt strange, because you had to rely on cameras and microphones, and sometimes they didn't show you what you needed to see. Not because someone was doing magic, but because the building was old and old, strong buildings have their own habits. Around midnight, they did the health and welfare checks. Even in a Supermax, people get sick. People get sad. The night shift tries to catch the signs early. They walk, they look in, they say names, they wait for a response. They log it all. Most of the time, it is dull. A man sits on his bunk and stares at a wall. Another writes letters he may never send. The TV in one cell glows with a late-night show, the sound low. A hand reaches for a cup of water, then stops because a cuffed hand moves like a slow fish. The officers mark boxes on clipboards and keep going. Just after 1:40 a.m., there was a small thing that didn't matter then, but did later. On Pod D, Cell 23, the inmate, a quiet man named Anthony Brown, asked for extra toilet paper. He never asked for anything. Carla noted it. She also noted his eyes. Not wild. Not dead. Just very awake. People think Supermax is all violence all the time. It isn't. Much of it is waiting. Waiting can make a person sharp in strange ways. At 1:58 a.m., the building did a normal hum behind the walls as a generator test rolled. The lights dimmed and came back. On camera, everything looked fine. At 2:06 a.m., the last round for that hour showed Anthony on his bunk, sheet up, both hands visible. Carla marked it and they moved on. Back in the control room, Mark poured coffee. They spoke in the easy, short way of people who don't waste words at night. They checked counts, signed paper, watched screens. Somewhere far away in another unit, a man coughed for a long time and then stopped. The radio told them a property check was complete in Pod B. The clock slid toward 2:11. Everything felt settled. Then the siren came and the shadow and the words through the intercom that sounded like two voices. The team formed up outside the pod door with shields and a camera pole, breathing slow through their masks. Mark felt his hands go steady in the way they always did when things got real. Carla's face went smooth as glass. They had trained for fights, for fires, for floods, for broken locks. They had training for an inmate trying to hurt himself, for a medical emergency. They did not have a box to check for a shadow that moved when Locke said it could not. "Open Sally Port 1, Carla said, and the first door slid with a low growl. The team stepped into the tight space between doors. The second door stayed red. "Hold," she said, "because you never rush a second door." She looked one more time at the monitors. Cell 23's bunk was still empty. The fog on the window had faded. The green square that had blinked was gone. The wide angle showed nothing but clean floor, closed doors, hard light. Mark keyed the radio. "Pod D, we're coming to you," he said, calm, because calm goes down the chain like a rope. Carla pressed the release for door 2. It did not open. A small red error light appeared that none of them had seen in years. At the same time, the intercom crackled again. Every hair on Mark's arm stood up. A voice came through, single this time, clear and close, as if the speaker were inches from the mic at the end of the tier. It was Anthony Brown, the man from Cell 23, the man who had been lying on his bunk 6 minutes ago. He said, in a voice that was almost a whisper but not scared, "Officer, you should not be here." And then, somewhere inside Pod D, beyond the door that would not open, the power died. The monitors for the whole pod went black in the same breath, like eyes closing. The team in the Sally Port turned their faces toward the darkness ahead. Someone's shield tapped the concrete. In the control room, the only sound was the slow, steady beat of the backup power kicking in and the soft, unbelieving word that slipped out of Carla's mouth before she reached for the manual override.
Now.
The emergency lights flickered to life, dim red bulbs along the ceiling that made everything look underwater. The air was thick and hot from the backup generators. The door between the Sally port and Pod D was still locked, but the lock light had gone blank, meaning the control panel didn't even know if it existed anymore. Carla's fingers flew over the manual switches. Nothing responded. "System's not reading," she said. Mark checked the feed again, black. Every single camera on Pod D was gone. All 32. The radio hissed with static, then cleared just long enough for a voice they didn't recognize to whisper, "Don't open that door." Every person in that small space froze. The sound didn't come from the radio line they used for the team. It came from the control frequency that only dispatch used, which meant whoever spoke wasn't supposed to have access. Mark stared at the wall of monitors. "If that's Brown, how's he?" Carla cut him off. "He's locked in. Or he was." She leaned close to the speaker. "Control to Pod D. Identify yourself." Static. Then another voice, lower this time. Male, not Brown's. "He's not alone." The hallway lights pulsed once and steadied. A thud echoed through the air ducts, metal on metal, traveling like footsteps inside the walls. The men in the Sally port turned, looking back at Carla through the glass. Their shields were up now. The youngest one, Officer Daniel Green, mouthed, "What do we do?" Mark took the radio. "Hold position. Do not enter until lights stabilize." He turned to Carla. "If power's cut, manual overrides will jam. We'll have to go down there." She shook her head. "You open that door blind, you're walking into something you don't understand." But the protocol said they couldn't leave a cell unaccounted for, especially if the inmate's location was unknown. They waited 10 seconds. The thudding stopped. Then, out of nowhere, the control screens flashed on again, but instead of the live camera feeds, every monitor showed the same single frame. The hallway of Pod D, empty except for a faint white outline near cell 23. It looked like a person made of light smoke. The image lasted less than a second before the feeds cut to normal again. Now the lights on the tier were back, steady white. Everything looked untouched. On the floor near cell 23, however, something new glimmered, a small puddle, dark and still. Carla exhaled hard. "We're going down." They entered the Sally port, for guards deep. When the second door opened, the smell hit first: metal, disinfectant, and something faintly sweet, like burnt plastic. The sound of their boots echoed sharp against the walls. "Pod D, status check," Mark called out, his voice steady. "This is a safety walk. Stay on your bunks." Silence. Only the hum of the lights and the clicking of their radios. They moved cell by cell. 17, occupied. 18, occupied. Inmates blinked against the brightness, confused, quiet. Most had earplugs in, or their faces pressed against thin pillows. At 22, a man sat upright, watching them with wide eyes. "You heard it too?" he whispered through the food port. Mark paused. "Heard what?" "The knock," the man said. 3 times. Then he was standing right there. He pointed towards cell 23. Then nothing. Carla wrote it down without answering. They moved to cell 23. The glass was fogged again, just like before, only this time from outside, as if the air around the door was colder than the rest of the tier. Inside, the bunk was made. Perfect corners, blanket tight. The metal toilet shone. The sink dripped once every few seconds. But no Anthony Brown. His orange jumpsuit hung neatly on the hook. His ID tag sat on the folded blanket. "Negative visual," Mark said into the radio. His voice cracked slightly. Carla ran the flashlight under the bunk, behind the toilet, up the vent. Empty. She pressed the intercom button by the cell door. "Brown, if you can hear me, respond." The speaker crackled. Then his voice came through, clear, calm, and too close. "You shouldn't have come." Everyone stepped back. The voice was coming from inside the control panel, not the cell. Carla reached toward the door handle, hand trembling despite herself. "Back up," Mark ordered quietly. She didn't move. "If he's in there." The entire tier went dark again. For 5 long seconds, the world was pure black. Then a sound like chains dragging across the floor filled the corridor, echoing off concrete. Someone screamed, one of the guards in the back. When the lights snapped on, Officer Green was gone. His shield lay on the floor, cracked down the middle. Carla's breath caught. Where is he? No answer. The intercom clicked again, and Green's voice came through now, soft, trembling. He's behind me. They spun toward the far end of the corridor. At the last cell, barely visible, stood a figure. The outline of a man in orange, head tilted to one side, eyes reflecting the red light. It was Anthony Brown. Only the cell door in front of him was still locked from the outside. He was on the wrong side of it. Anthony, Mark said, keeping his voice even, don't move. The man smiled. It wasn't angry. It wasn't sad. Just tired. You people never listen at night, he said. You think we're the only ones awake. Before anyone could answer, the entire row of lights at the top of the tier blew out in a shower of sparks. And the last thing Carla saw before everything went black again was Anthony Brown reaching out his hand toward the control room camera and the camera turning itself off. To be continued.